All right. Hello, epidemics. Hope everyone's doing okay today. So, announcements. Nothing new going on here. Well, one new thing. The quiz is due Sunday, April 10th before midnight. There's a journal entry due Sunday, April 10th before midnight. It's a little different than a typical journal entry, so please look over the instructions carefully. And I wanted to say, I have really enjoyed reading you guys' journal entries. You've done a great job as a class. It's just been very, very good work there. I'm really impressed. The project is due before midnight on Sunday, May 1st. Presentations are going to be on the 26th and the 28th. The other announcement is there's not going to be class next Tuesday. I'm looking for something for you to read or a video for you guys to watch. I was hoping I could find something on tuberculosis. I haven't been able to find anything I like on TB. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to end up posting for you guys yet, but I will get something up for you guys to do next Tuesday when you're missing this class. Okay, so we're discussing malaria. So we have discussed bacterial infections. We have discussed viral infections. Now we're going to discuss a parasite. Malaria is caused by a parasite. So it's different in a lot of ways from the diseases we've discussed to this point. In addition, it doesn't have a lot of the characteristics of epidemics that we've learned about. It doesn't tend to go very much with people traveling. Generally, if you have malaria and you travel to a non-malaria area, you're not likely to spread it to other people in that area. Nate, go ahead.
Just an observation. Is that plasmo, is that a common parasitic prefix? Because I remember you were talking about toxoplasmosis earlier, and I believe that was a parasite as well.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about toxoplasmosis. I'm not sure why the plasm or plasmo part is in toxoplasmosis. In here, it's referring to blood because this is an infection of the blood. That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Okay, so malaria tends to be endemic. Remember, endemic means that it occurs in a particular area constantly or on and off over time. Malaria is seasonal, it is widespread, and as I mentioned last time, it kills 500,000 to 1 million people every year. Most of these will be children under 5. Most of these in rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The other major killers are, oh, Jerry? Nope, okay. The other major killers, TB, tuberculosis, HIV, and pneumonia and diarrheal diseases. But those pneumonias and diarrheal diseases are caused by several different infectious organisms. So when we're talking about something specific, we're looking at the biggest worldwide killers being malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV. And we've already talked about HIV. I'm going to move this over here. So malaria is caused by a parasite. The parasite is a type of organism. The big category here is protist. You may or may not have heard of protist before, but if you think of all living things, we divide them into kingdoms, and there's the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungus kingdom, and then there are the protists. Nate, go ahead.
That's taxonomy, right?
That's taxonomy, yes. Protist is kind of a dumping ground. If an organism is living, they're not a bacteria, they're not an animal, they're not a plant, they're not a fungus, it gets dumped into protist. So there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in protists. Generally speaking, so for malaria, the malaria protist is a single cell. It's larger than a bacteria, but smaller than our cells. So this image, these circles are red blood cells. This is a false color electron micrograph. These are infected red blood cells, and those yellowish circles inside are the parasite. Those are the cause of malaria right there. Because protists, and specifically the malaria parasite, genetically and cellularly, it is more closely related to us than things like bacteria or fungal infections or viruses, which means that it is harder to treat. If you're trying to treat a bacteria, you look for something in bacteria that isn't found in people. You look for a gene or a protein that people don't have. It's much, much harder to do that with malaria because it is more closely related to us. There are, Nate, go ahead.
Now, parasitism, that's a form of symbiosis, right? And I believe there's three. There's mutualism, commensalism, and the most detrimental one is parasitism, but
yes.
Okay.
Parasitism is not always put into symbiosis. Some people do, but I'm going to put a question mark there because not everybody does. So when we talk about symbiosis, it's an interaction between two different species. And it's not a predator-prey interaction. So if we talk about mutualism, that one, the name says it all. Both participants in a mutualism form of symbiosis benefit. So think about bees pollinating flowers. The bees get food, the flowers get to reproduce. Commensalism is a situation where one species gets a benefit and the other one doesn't, but isn't harmed. It's harder to picture those. Jerry, I think your hand went up first.
Is that like a leech, for example?
No, we would put leeches under parasitism.
Okay.
Would a form of commensalism be like the mites that like eat the skin like on our bodies because they don't harm us, but they get like nutrients from it?
Yeah, quite possibly.
Or those little fish that swim beside sharks and they like eat the debris or whatever.
Yep, that would be a good example. Yes, absolutely. Parasitism is when one species gets a benefit and the other one is harmed, usually not killed. So if you think about the leech attaches to your, sucks some blood. That's not a big amount of harm for a healthy adult individual. If you have one leech, you're going to survive that. It's not going to be an issue. If you're already unhealthy or very, very young, or you get lots of leeches, that can be a problem. We see it more with ticks. Wild animals can have so many ticks on them that the animal becomes anemic. They don't have enough blood, and it can eventually kill them. So generally speaking, one parasite, not a big deal. Lots of parasites can be lethal. And with malaria, I mean, if you see these little tiny things living inside of red blood cells, you get a lot of parasites. Jerry.
So I saw this thing where kangaroos had ticks on them, but at the watering hole, crows would eat the ticks off the kangaroo. So that's like two layers of this symbiosis.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the crows and the kangaroos, that's mutualism. And the ticks and the kangaroos is parasitism. And the crows and the ticks, that's a predator-prey relationship.
Wow.
Yeah. Biology is always more complicated. Okay, so when we talk about malaria, there are actually 4 different parasites that can cause malaria. Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium malaria. I'm going to go through these a little bit so you understand the differences between them. Most of what we're going to be talking about, most of the malaria that is severe is from the Plasmodium falciparum species. All right, so good time for a screenshot. Nope, I don't have. All right. Plasmodium falciparum or falciparum, depending on what part of the world you live in, has a very fast replication rate. So you get 1 or 2 parasites in you and the numbers are going to go up really, really, really quickly. It is more recently evolved, so it's a younger species. has a short incubation period. Remember what the incubation period is?
It's the time that it kind of hides before you see symptoms. So in this case, you would notice them very quickly.
Yes. The incubation period is the time between infection and symptoms. And it's in Plasmodium falciparum or falciparum, it's around 7 days. This is the dominant form in sub-Saharan Africa. And it causes the most severe disease. So the symptoms are going to be worse with this particular species. It's going to be more lethal than the other species. So this is the bad one. Okay, they're all bad, but that's the worst one. Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium ovale. We're going to talk about those together because they're very similar. These have the weird trait of having a dormant period where it can hide in the liver. So it can live in your liver, not really replicating very much, and it can re-emerge months or years later. So you go on vacation to Africa, you don't take your anti-malaria medications, you get infected with Plasmodium vivax, you come back, you're not sick, you think you're great, I didn't get malaria anyway, and 2 years later, you start getting malaria. Again, this is primarily found in Africa, both of these strains. Plasmodium malaria. This is a worldwide disease. So it can be found in lots of places around the world. Central and South America, parts of Asia. This is a milder infection, but a longer incubation period. So the incubation period for this one is about 30 days. So as I mentioned, most of what we're going to talk about is falciparum or Plasmodium malaria. We're not going to talk about vivax and ovale very much. So what do you think determines the distribution of malaria, where malaria occurs? Nate.
Mosquito population.
It depends on the species of mosquito in the area. So these are the human malarias. There are malarias that infect other mammals. There are malarias that infect birds. There are malarias that infect reptiles. So there's lots of different malarias. And just like being specific for certain animals to infect or vertebrate animals to infect, they're going to be specific for which mosquito they can infect. It's not like every type of mosquito can transmit malaria. It's not like malaria can get into every type of mosquito. Avian malaria is a huge problem in Hawaii. It wiped out most of the native birds. The only place you can find, or pretty much the only place you can find the native birds of Hawaii is at higher altitudes, because the mosquito that carries malaria, avian malaria, can't survive at high altitudes. Nate.
So is that because the birds were just eating the mosquitoes, or were they actually getting like bitten by the
They were getting bitten by the mosquitoes. Yeah. Mosquitoes will bite any type of vertebrate animal on land. So frogs, snakes, lizards, turtles, birds, crocodiles, mammals, any of them.
They can penetrate crocodile skin?
There are some places where they can bite through crocodile skin.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. Some places on the crocodile. Okay, screenshot this. All right, so where's my annotate? So this, of course, is the continent of Africa. This area up here is where the Sahara is found. So all of these countries that are colored in are part of sub-Sahara Africa. It is believed that malaria is an ancient disease. There is a 100 million year old biting midge. So it wasn't a mosquito, but it was a little insect that bites, found in amber, that has malaria parasites. So it ate blood. That blood has the malaria parasites in it. 100 million years ago. That means the dinosaurs were infected with malaria. Nate, go ahead.
You always hear about like there was an insect trapped in amber or something like that, but how does that actually happen?
Jurassic Park.
And what is
You
amber?
remember that?
Sorry, go ahead.
I think they're on the tree and the amber is coming from the tree and they just get encased in it and then preserved forever.
Yeah, amber is fossilized tree sap. Yep, Jerry was exactly right there. Okay, so malaria, the parasite, evolved from an algae. Talk about bizarre. It has genes for photosynthesis. So it doesn't have all the genes it needs to do photosynthesis, but it has some. So clearly, some point more than 100 million years ago, it was capable of photosynthesis. We figure the first humans got infected when the first humans evolved. So we know that it has caused billions of deaths. We talked about this, somewhere around 50 billion deaths since the evolution of humans. One estimate says half of all humans who ever existed died of malaria. I was talking with my husband about this little fact, and he was having trouble believing that it could have killed 50 billion people. We had to debate when is the time period here? Because he was thinking the time period was like 10,000 years. And I'm like, no, people have been around for longer than that. So it's a time period of about 300,000 years, roughly. So billions, hard to understand number. So 7.6 billion is the population of Earth right now for humans. So 1 billion seconds takes 31.7 years. If you spent $10,000 a day, it would take you 274 years to spend $1 billion. No days off. It's a freaking huge number that we really don't grasp. Once I started looking this kind of data up to give us perspective, now I'm really mad about all these billionaires. You're never going to spend $1 billion. You don't need that kind of money. Okay. So again, you can see the Democratic Republic of Congo is getting blamed as a source for malaria. Given that it's been around for millions of years, there really wasn't an Africa 100 million years ago. The continents were different. But this is a map looking at genetic subpopulations of Plasmodium falciparum. And we think Plasmodium falciparum is the more recent evolving form. And we're going to talk a little bit about that some point during these lectures. Okay, good time for a screenshot. All right. This is scary. This is the life cycle of human malaria. I'm going to walk us through this. Don't try and take notes. Just pay attention. Step 1, a mosquito that is infected with malaria bites a person. And it injects, and this is weird, a form of malaria that's called a sporozoite. So sporozoites look like these little rod-shaped structures. That's what they physically look like under the microscope. The sporozoites go to the liver cell and they infect the liver cell. But when the sporozoites reproduce in the liver cell, they produce a different type of malaria parasite. It's got a different shape. It's going to be able to reproduce in very high numbers, which the sporozoites can't reproduce in high numbers. And it's eventually going to burst out of those liver cells. And now it can infect red blood cells. So the sporozoite form cannot infect red blood cells, but the sporozoite offspring can. Nate, go ahead.
So the sporozoite's kind of like a vehicle for, I know, it kind of just reminds me of Aliens, how like the face hugger attaches the face, then it turns into the chest burster. And so I don't know if it's exactly the same, but kind of reminiscent.
That it is reminiscent, and Alien was at least partly inspired by some parasites, because there are multiple parasites who do this. Imagine if you reproduced and your offspring were pigeons. And pigeons have a very different lifestyle than you do, right? And so your pigeons go out, and when they reproduce, their offspring are fish. And then living a very different lifestyle. And eventually the fish reproduce and produce people again. That's the weirdness that's going on here. And you may be able to see that I whited out. I put little white boxes in front of a lot of the terms on this one. So like there's a white box here because I didn't want you guys to have to look at all of these different terms because it's so much more complex than what I'm describing. All right, so we get the human blood's infected, the red blood cells get infected, and you get a very distinctive circular parasite inside the red blood cells that have an area that stains a little bit different. This is called the diamond ring stage. That doesn't last. They change into, again, a different form, burst out of red blood cells, reinfect red blood cells, around and around and around we go. Eventually, some of them will start to reproduce. They become what we call a gametocyte. Do you guys know what a gamete is?
Isn't it a genetic trait or something?
It's related to genetics, yes. Gametes in humans are sperm and eggs. So a gametocyte, C-Y-T-E, refers to a cell. So a gametocyte is a cell that makes sperm and eggs. Now, the gametocytes for malaria, they do this. They make sperm and eggs. They are either male or female. So this is a sexual reproduction phase. These other phases are asexual. So one sporozoite gets into your liver cell and it can reproduce. One of these red blood cell infecting parasites gets into your red blood cell and it can reproduce and cause disease. Gametocytes, you need both male and female. And so you get sperm and egg recombining and they produce, or I'm sorry, they're moving through your red blood, your circulatory system. They're in your veins, they're in your arteries. And here comes the mosquito. And it takes up these gametocytes. The gametocytes then make sperm and eggs, sexual reproduction happens, and you get yet another different stage of malaria, another different type of malaria that can infect the mosquito. It infects the mosquito, and it then produces sporozoites, which move to the salivary glands of the mosquito and then can be injected into another infectious person. Wow, that is complicated. So I'm going to go to the whiteboard and talk about some of this, what I want you to actually remember from this. You don't have to remember this. Nobody except malaria experts memorize this pathway, this whole thing. But I've got some important concepts I want to explain. So if you want a screenshot of this, go ahead, and we're going to go to the whiteboard. Okay. So why is the life cycle so complicated? Any ideas?
So it can affect more different type of species because each species has different physiology. So the parasite changes its physiology to be able to invade.
Exactly. It has to be able to infect two very different organisms. When we're talking about human malaria, we're talking about infecting humans and infecting the mosquito.
It reminds me of nanobots. Like if you're familiar with Star Trek and the Borg, they would inject you with nanobots, and it didn't matter what species it was, it would change them.
Mhm. Okay. And yes, Jerry, you had the good point that the physiology is different. The immune systems are different. And the cells are different. Specifically the biochemistry, what the cells do and how they do it. In addition to that, it infects different cell types. So in humans, it infects liver cells, red blood cells, and some of the phase, at least one of the phases can just live free in the bloodstream. That's the gametocytes. In mosquitoes, it has to infect gut cells, so cells in the digestive tract, and salivary cells. The glands, the cells that produce saliva. So of course the life cycle has to be complicated. There's not one, you can't, except unless you're a Borg, you can't devise one type of parasite that can infect all these different types of organisms, all these different types of cells. So when we talk about these differences, I want to bring in two terms, morphology and physiology. So morphology. Does anybody have any association with the term morph?
To be able to change.
Change, okay, yep, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers or something, right?
That's true.
Morphology refers to appearance. Physiology refers to how an organism does what needs to be done. At the internal, we're talking about internal to the body. So your physiology includes things like how your heart rate is regulated and how your blood pressure is regulated, how your cells make proteins. All of that stuff goes under physiology. So the different forms of malaria parasite have different morphology, they look different, and they have different physiology. They behave differently. For human malaria, the mosquito, has to be in the genus Anopheles. Any other type of mosquito cannot transmit malaria. Only the females feed on blood. So only the female Anopheles mosquitoes can transmit malaria. Females only take a blood meal right before laying eggs. So she needs blood to make her eggs. If she's not in reproductive mode, Mosquitoes tend to eat things like pollen and nectar, smaller insects maybe. So they really tend to be plant specialists, except for right before she lays eggs. There are 30 to 40 species of Anopheles mosquito that can carry human malaria. Other species carry different types of malaria. So with mosquitoes that bite birds usually do not bite people. So they tend to be bird specialists. If they're mammal specialists, they tend not to bite birds or reptiles. So there's some specialization going on there. All right. Jerry, did you have your hand up? Nope. Okay. So in the mosquito, the mosquitoes do get sick. So it's not like they're just carrying the parasite around. They actually do get sick. And the mosquito has effects on the malaria changes the behavior of Anopheles mosquitoes. Specifically, what it does is they stimulate the mosquito to be more active and bite more. So the parasite manipulates the behavior of the host. We see this in multiple different parasites. Kind of a scary thing. We see it with toxoplasma. The toxoplasma parasite causes behavior changes in rodents, and there's some evidence that it causes behavior changes in infected people. Nobody wants that to be true, so there's a lot of debate on that one. Okay. What I want to talk about is the form. Nate, go ahead.
Would it be possible for mosquitoes to transmit Yersinia pestis too?
Not to my knowledge, no. It's diseases tend to be very, very specific about which vectors they can use. You're not going to get malaria from a tick bite or a tsetse fly bite. You get different diseases from ticks or tsetse flies than you do from mosquitoes. Form that infects red blood cells. This is the one that we really spend a lot of time thinking about because this causes the most symptoms. So they are hiding from the immune system inside the red blood cells. or RBC. So the immune system isn't going to attack red blood cells. It's very, very unusual for that to happen. And when the parasite is in there, it's feeding on hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the iron-containing protein that actually does the carrying of oxygen. Okay, screenshot this. When it's infecting the red blood cell, it reproduces asexually, which means without sex. So one parasite divides into two, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When the hemoglobin is all consumed, the parasites burst out of the red blood cells and invade new red blood cells. Makes sense. They run out of food, they're going to break out and infect other cells. And one of the weird things about the malaria cycle is this tends to be synchronous. So because of the way the parasite reproduces, you tend to get a whole bunch of red blood cells infected at the same time. All of these red blood cells, the parasite in them is eating hemoglobin, dividing, and they divide at the same rate and run out of hemoglobin at the same time. They burst out of those red blood cells, infect new red blood cells. Again, these are all infected at about the same time. So again, everybody's feeding, everybody's reproducing, and they burst out at the same time because the reproductive cycle is so consistent. This synchronous release causes the bloodstream to be full of parasites.
Professor, would someone with sickle cell anemia be like immune to this?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Sickle cell anemia provides a little bit of resistance. That's on this page.
I was thinking that. Yeah.
All right. When this happens, there is a strong immune response. Your immune system causes fever, chills, aches, and fatigue. So these are the symptoms of malaria. They're pretty severe, and you have all of these symptoms, and then you feel better. And then when the next cycle is released, your immune system goes overboard again, and you get these symptoms again. So it's a recurring disease. You get the symptoms, you get over it, you get the symptoms again, because you're not really clearing the parasite from your system. And because the parasite destroys red blood cells, you get a couple of things. You can get anemia, which is not having enough red blood cells, not getting enough oxygen to your cells. You can also get jaundice, which is a yellow color of the skin and eyes. And it's caused by excess bilirubin. Bilirubin is made when red blood cells break down. Usually, it's cleared from the body by the liver. But remember, your liver was already infected and is probably still infected. So you've got way too many red blood cells breaking down, and your liver is not functioning as normal. Okay. How are we doing with this? Complicated as all get out, right?
I understand everything you're saying.
Excellent. Maybe I should go back and do the hard version.
It's honestly, it's the scariest thing God ever created. I thought the bubonic plague was that. He was like, no, wait a week. It's like,
Yeah. Nate, go ahead.
In terms of jaundice, is that specifically related to the liver? Like that, what causes it?
The red blood cells breaking down and or the liver not working very well. Yeah.
Okay.
You often see jaundice in newborn babies, because the liver hasn't started fully functioning yet, and it may take a couple of days before it starts working well.
Only reason I asked, when I was in the hospital, there was a gentleman who had liver failure. He was in the room with me, and he was only 51 years old, but long life of drinking continuously, and he was very yellow and all that stuff. So.
Yep. Yep, you can get that with all kinds of liver disease, hepatitis.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the liver is actually pretty regenerative, right? But once a certain amount of scar tissue builds up, it's too late.
Yes. So you can donate part of your liver to somebody who needs a liver. And your liver will regrow, and the part that you donate will grow into a liver in the recipient. But if you have the scar tissue from a life of drinking drugs and that sort of stuff, the scar tissue doesn't heal. And because it's still in the space, there's no space for the liver to grow larger. Even just removing that scar tissue, though, that doesn't tend to allow for regeneration for reasons I'm not completely sure of, but probably just due to the amount of damage.
And now that's called cirrhosis, right? Like the actual term.
Yes. Yep. Okay, screenshot. So, the disease. I already mentioned fever, aches, chills. Generally speaking, those happen every 2 to 3 days. And they last for 6 to 10 hours. This is the time a person is most infectious, which means that the mosquito, if a mosquito bites you when you're having one of these attacks, it's much, much more likely to get malaria from your bloodstream. In between these attacks, there's less malaria moving freely through your bloodstream, so it's less likely that a mosquito could pick it up. Now, infected humans, when they're having an attack, release an odor that attracts mosquitoes. So this parasite, when it's ready to infect a person, causes the mosquito to bite more aggressively. And when it's in your bloodstream and it needs to get back into a mosquito, it makes you smell attractive to mosquitoes. Are we starting to see why this killed so many people?
Absolutely.
So eventually what can happen, you can get kidney failure, seizures, mental confusion, and a coma. And part of that is due to the anemia and low oxygen levels. If you don't have hemoglobin, if you don't have red blood cells, you can't carry a lot of oxygen. Damage to the liver causes the jaundice. In addition to that, if that wasn't enough, infected red blood cells are sticky. So your normal red blood cells have a very smooth surface, and they're designed to slip through tiny spaces, the little tiny capillaries, the smallest of the blood vessels. When they're infected, they aren't smooth, so they can clog small blood vessels. This prevents them from going through the spleen. And the reason for that is the spleen will basically kill infected red blood cells. So some of them are going to get in the spleen, but clogging those small blood vessels helps the parasite avoid the spleen. What else do those clogs cause? Strokes. Damage to any organ that's not getting enough oxygen. So it can be any organ in the body. This is one of the things that COVID does. It causes an increased risk of clotting, and wherever those clots form, you're going to get damage to the organs that are not getting enough oxygen anymore. So you end up with strokes, which lead to mental confusion and seizures. This can also cause swelling of the brain. Swelling of the brain. Let's think about this. Your brain is inside a skull. There's no room for expansion. When your brain swells, you're going to get damage. And some of these symptoms, as a result of strokes or swelling of the brain, can be permanent. Brain cells don't heal themselves very well. The other place that gets a lot of damage, kidneys have a lot of small blood vessels. So they get lots of clots. Kidneys are very important for getting rid of what's called metabolic waste. So waste products produced by your cells. It's also important for managing things like blood levels of salt and sugar. So that can be a problem. If your kidneys fail, you're going to need dialysis or a kidney transplant. Kidneys are another thing that most people can donate one of and be fine. Nate, go ahead.
Is that also called renal failure? Like when
Yes.
the kidneys stop? What does renal mean though? Is that just another term for kidney function?
Renal refers to kidneys in general. Yep. There are some more specifics there, but I can't quite remember exactly what they are. So, all right, screenshot. If that wasn't enough, severe malaria can cause hypoglycemia. Hypo means low. Glycemia refers to sugar in the blood. How much sugar is in the bloodstream? Hypoglycemia can cause coma and death. Do you think I'm done yet? Malaria can also, Julia, go ahead.
So it means low blood sugar.
Low blood sugar, yes.
That can cause coma.
Yes,
Really?
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, your blood sugar needs to be within a very specific range. It is the only fuel that your brain can use. So if your blood sugar gets too low, your brain can't function correctly.
So you need sugar, but you need like the right amount of it.
Yes.
Okay.
And you don't need to consume like white sugar. Your body can make sugar from a lot of carbohydrates and other things.
Yeah.
What if someone's on like a carnivore diet or something? What happens?
You can make, your cells can make sugar even if you're on a carnivore type diet. Carnivore type diets are, however, hard on the kidneys in particular, and can cause deficiencies in certain vitamins.
Makes sense.
That's like the same with being a vegan too, right?
Yeah, they're different.
feel-
Different
I
deficiencies.
feel like it's not good for you.
It's not everybody can be healthy on a vegan diet.
Yeah.
Nate, I see your hand up.
Oh, would you like me to speak or do you want to finish yours?
Let me finish the vegan comment. So vegan diets are low in certain vitamins and minerals, and you have to take supplements. There's not a way that you can eat just plants and survive long term. We have to have supplements or meat in the diet. And I've known some people who've been healthy on a vegan diet, but they're like obsessed with what they eat.
Yeah.
Have to be to make sure you get all the vitamins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Nate.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to speak a little bit on the carnivore diet. Well, not similar. I've been on the keto diet for about 3 years. Helped me lose like 80 pounds.
Whoa.
6 months, I think. But you're right. Basically, so ketosis is, instead of your body burning carbohydrates for fuel, it burns fats. So I do take some supplements like potassium because you want to avoid a lot of you want to stay under like 50 grams of carbs a day. But I mean, it lowered my blood pressure. But you just got to be careful with it. But there are many benefits. Help my teeth out a lot too, because carbohydrates, they harmonize with plaque,
Mhm.
causing it. Yeah, so I could go on and on about it, but
Yeah. Was there somebody else who wanted to chime in? Okay. Yeah, it's funny how so many people say you need to eat a healthy diet, but what is a healthy diet? It's never really defined very well, is it? My last office mate was a professor of nutrition studies. Nutrition studies are a hot mess, let me tell you. Okay.
don't even get me started with BMI and its flaws too.
Oh, you're trying to get me off the topic to get on a rant, aren't you?
No, just pointing out the obvious.
Because that's one of the things I hate the BMI. I hate the your weight should be between this and this, because it's not that simple.
Yeah, everyone's body's different, so
Yeah.
I mean, there's levels to it.
Yes. Okay.
I'm pretty sure last time I went to the doctor's office, it was like my doctor mentioned that, like, according to my BMI, I would be obese, but like it makes no sense because I've been lifting for like 4 years. So like I don't
Yeah.
look like an obese person.
It's
Yes.
an archaic method. Like it's the relevancy is so minimum, and the sad part is they kind of they use it in like military fitness tests too, which is nonsensical.
That's a bad place to use it.
Yeah, and they go off abdominal circumference. I remember a guy, huge weightlifter, could run his 2 miles in like record time, but because his abdominal circumference was bigger than like 38 inches, he kept failing PT tests and they eventually kicked him out. He was actually a good troop too, so shows you how stupid their standards are.
All right, so let's bring it back to malaria and epidemics, because I could go off on BMI too. Malaria also causes pulmonary edema. You guys know what that is?
Something with the lungs.
Yep.
I know it's not fibrosis because that's scarring.
It's swelling of the lungs, specifically fluid. This is going to make it hard to breathe, right? And there's a high risk of this turning into pneumonia. You think I'm done yet? The parasite also produces toxins. And the toxins can do a lot of different things in the body. Or whether it's your body or the mosquito's body, the toxins are not great. And now I'm done with all of the different things that this parasite can do to you. How's everybody doing with all this? I know Jerry's a little freaked out.
Are the toxins the waste of the malaria parasite? Or that could be a toxin as well?
That could be a toxin as well. I think these are other things. Remember, it changes the mosquito's behavior. It makes people smell different. So the toxins may be for that or evading the immune system.
Oh, right. I hear you. Wow. Good point. When it switched from photosynthesis to vampirism is what I'm going to call it, like that. And when you said mosquitoes eat plant, I never knew this in my whole life, that they eat plants and things. So I was just thinking in my head, maybe it mutated inside of the mosquito, you know, was introduced to blood. I don't know. It's a stretch.
Yeah, but it probably went something like that. It was an algae that was eaten by a mosquito, and eventually one of them had a mutation that allowed it to survive in the mosquito, and off we go.
Went from sunlight to blood. That is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, indeed. All right. Now, malaria is often good at evading the immune system. So part one, the different forms, the ones that infect the liver versus the blood versus the gametocytes, make it hard for the immune system to recognize. So right off the bat, it's very hard for the immune system to recognize the parasite. Inside the liver, it's hiding. It's inside of a cell. It's not showing anything on the surface of the cell that says that cell is infected. When it gets into the red blood cells, most of the cells in your body have a system where they can signal that they're infected. It turns off that warning system that tells the immune system that particular cell is infected. Now, part of this process, oh, shit, we are out of time. Okay, I'm not quite going to be able to finish this. So we're going to come back to evading the immune system next time. Any questions? Anybody want to get malaria?
I can't wait till we find out what the cure is, but I'll wait. If
Oh,
there
you're
is
going to be disappointed.
Oh boy.
All right, remember, no lecture on Tuesday, but I'll see you guys next Thursday and we'll talk about how malaria evades the immune system.
Okie dokie.
Take care, all.
Bye, everybody.